The autumn leaves crunched under Danny Rodriguez's boots as he approached the old garage behind his father's house in suburban Detroit. At 58, Danny had inherited more than just property when his father Manuel passed away 3 months earlier. He'd inherited decades of memories, both beautiful and painful, that seemed to echo from every corner of the small ranch-style home where he'd grown up. The garage had been locked since 1972, according to his mother Carmen, who'd passed 2 years before his father. "Mijo, your father never wanted anyone to go in there," she told him during one of their last conversations. Something about the car, something that hurt him too much to remember. Danny had respected his father's wishes for 51 years, but now, as the sole inheritor of the family home, he felt compelled to finally understand what had kept his father away from his own garage for half a century. Manuel Rodriguez had been a proud man, a Korean War veteran who'd worked 35 years at the Ford Rouge plant, building the cars that defined American automotive excellence, but he'd never spoken about whatever was hidden behind that garage door. The padlock was old and rusty, but Danny's bolt cutters made quick work of it. As the heavy wooden door creaked open for the first time since the Nixon administration, shafts of afternoon sunlight illuminated something that took Danny's breath away. A 1967 Pontiac Le Mans hardtop in burgundy maroon, sitting exactly where it had been parked over 5 decades ago. The car was covered in dust and time, but its classic lines were unmistakable. Even after all these years, Danny could see this had once been a beautiful machine, the kind of car that represented American automotive pride in its purest form. But why had his father abandoned it here? And what story did this forgotten warrior have to tell? Danny walked slowly around the Le Mans, his eyes taking in every detail. The car was equipped with the 326 cubic-inch V8 engine, a 4-barrel carburetor, and what appeared to be a 4-speed manual transmission. This wasn't just any grocery-getter Le Mans, but a genuine performance machine. The burgundy paint had dulled over the decades, but the body showed no signs of rust or damage. It was as if the car had been carefully preserved in time. On the passenger seat, Danny found a manila envelope with his father's handwriting. "For Danny, when you're ready to understand." Inside were documents that told a story Danny had never heard. The original purchase receipt dated March 15th, 1967, showing that Manuel had bought the car brand new for $2,147. There were also maintenance records meticulously kept until December 1972, and photographs of the car in its prime, gleaming in the driveway, Manuel standing proudly beside it in his army dress uniform. But it was the last item in the envelope that stopped Danny cold, a letter addressed to him, written in his father's careful script but never delivered. The letter was dated just 6 months before his father's death, and the first lines made Danny's hands tremble. "Son, this car carries a burden I've never been able to share with you. It's time you knew about your brother." Danny's world tilted. Brother? He'd been an only child, or so he'd always believed. He sat heavily on an old workbench, his mind racing as he continued reading his father's words. The letter spoke of another son, Eduardo, born 2 years before Danny, but lost in a way that had broken Manuel's heart so completely that he'd never been able to speak of it. The Le Mans, apparently, had been Eduardo's car. According to the letter, Eduardo Rodriguez had been everything a father could want in a son. Born in 1948, he'd grown up loving cars almost as much as he loved his country. When he turned 18 in 1966, Manuel had surprised him with the brand new Le Mans as a graduation gift, using money he'd saved for years while working double shifts at the Ford plant. Eduardo had treasured the car, spending every weekend washing and waxing it, fine-tuning the engine, and taking it to local car shows where it consistently won trophies for its pristine condition. The photographs in the envelope showed a young man who looked remarkably like Danny, standing proudly next to the burgundy Pontiac with a smile that could light up the world. But 1969 changed everything. Eduardo's draft number had come up, and despite Manuel's protests and fears, the young man had embraced his duty with the same pride his father had shown during the Korean conflict. He said he wanted to serve his country the way I had, Manuel's letter explained. I was proud of him, but terrified. I'd seen war, and I knew what it could take from a family. Eduardo had left for Vietnam in October 1969, promising to return for Christmas 1970 to take the Le Mans on a cross-country road trip they'd been planning together. He'd written letters home describing his experiences as a helicopter mechanic with the 1st Cavalry Division, always ending with questions about how the car was running and promises of the modifications he planned to make when he returned. The last letter from Eduardo arrived in November 1970. 3 weeks later, 2 uniformed officers appeared at the Rodriguez family door with news that would shatter Manuel's world and explain why a beautiful car had sat motionless for 51 years. Eduardo Rodriguez died on December 12, 1970, when his helicopter was shot down during a rescue mission near the Cambodian border. He was 22 years old, just 2 weeks away from rotating home to his family, his Le Mans, and the future he'd planned so carefully. The official notification spoke of heroism and sacrifice, of a young man who died saving the lives of wounded soldiers. But for Manuel, all that mattered was that his firstborn son would never come home. The grief nearly destroyed the family. Carmen, pregnant with Danny at the time, blamed herself for somehow bringing bad luck by carrying new life while Eduardo was in danger. Manuel threw himself into work, taking every available overtime shift to avoid coming home to a house filled with memories of his lost son. The Le Mans sat in the driveway like a monument to shattered dreams, too painful to drive, but too precious to sell. I tried to start it once, Manuel's letter continued, about 6 months after we got the news. I thought maybe driving Eduardo's car would help me feel close to him again, but when that 326 engine fired up, all I could hear was your brother's laughter from the passenger seat. All I could see was his hands on that steering wheel. I turned it off and pushed it into the garage, and I swore I'd never put myself through that pain again. When Danny was born in March 1971, Manuel made the conscious decision to never speak of Eduardo. He couldn't bear the thought of his new son living in the shadow of a brother he'd never meet, and he convinced Carmen that keeping the secret was the kindest thing they could do. The Le Mans became a buried chapter in their family history, locked away with grief too heavy to carry. Reading his father's letter, Danny finally understood the weight his parents had carried throughout his entire life. Every Father's Day, every birthday, every milestone in Danny's life had been shadowed by the memory of another son who would never experience those moments. The Le Mans wasn't just a car. It was a time capsule containing all of Eduardo's unfulfilled dreams and Manuel's unbearable sorrow. But as Danny continued reading, he discovered that his father's perspective had evolved in his final years. I've made a terrible mistake, the letter admitted. By keeping Eduardo's secret, I've denied both of you boys the chance to know each other. Eduardo would have loved you, Danny. He would have taught you about cars, about life, about being a good man, and you deserved to know you had a brother who was a hero. Odin, Manuel's letter went on to explain that he'd spent his last years researching Eduardo's military service, connecting with other veterans from his unit, and learning details about his son's final mission that the original notification hadn't included. Eduardo hadn't just died in a helicopter crash. He'd volunteered for an extremely dangerous rescue mission to save a downed aircraft crew, knowing the risks but unwilling to leave fellow soldiers behind. Your brother earned the Silver Star and Purple Heart for his actions that day, Manuel wrote. The medals are in a box under my workbench, along with letters from the men he saved. I was too broken to receive them properly when they were presented, but I want you to have them now. Eduardo died a hero, and his memory deserves better than being hidden away like a shameful secret. The letter concluded with a request that would challenge everything Danny thought he knew about moving forward. Please bring Eduardo's car back to life. Let it carry his memory with pride instead of grief. Danny spent the next 3 hours in the garage, reading through every document his father had saved and examining the Le Mans from bumper to bumper. Despite sitting motionless for 51 years, the car appeared to be in remarkably good condition. Manuel had apparently prepared it for long-term storage before locking it away, draining the fluids and protecting the interior with tarps. But bringing a car back to life after 5 decades of slumber was no simple task. Danny was a skilled mechanic. 35 years as an aircraft maintenance supervisor in the Air Force had taught him everything about engines, hydraulics, and electrical systems. But this project would require more than technical knowledge. It would require the emotional strength to honor a brother he'd never known, while healing wounds his family had carried for generations. The next morning, Danny called his old Air Force buddy Tom Morrison, who ran a classic car restoration shop in nearby Warren. Tom had been asking Danny to help with the project ever since his retirement, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to combine their skills. When Danny explained the situation, Tom's response was immediate. "Bring her over, Danny. We'll make your brother proud." Moving the Le Mans proved to be an adventure in itself. The tires had long since gone flat and cracked, and the fuel system would need to be completely rebuilt before anyone could even attempt to start the engine. They loaded it onto a flatbed trailer, and as Danny watched his brother's car emerge from the garage into sunlight for the first time since 1972, he felt a connection to Eduardo that transcended death and time. At Tom's shop, they began the painstaking process of assessment. Every component needed to be evaluated, cleaned, rebuilt, or replaced. But hidden beneath decades of dust and neglect, they found evidence of Eduardo's loving care. Handwritten notes tucked behind trim pieces, custom modifications that showed real mechanical knowledge. As Tom and Danny disassembled the Le Mans for restoration, they discovered that Eduardo had been far more than just a car enthusiast. He'd been a genuine automotive craftsman. Hidden throughout the car were subtle modifications that showed deep mechanical understanding. Carefully ported cylinder heads, a custom-balanced rotating assembly, and hand-fabricated intake manifold improvements that wouldn't be discovered until they pulled the engine. "Your brother knew what he was doing," Tom observed as they examined Eduardo's handiwork. "These modifications are the kind of thing you'd see from professional race engine builders. This kid had serious talent." In the trunk, wrapped in oiled cloth, they found Eduardo's personal tool set, high-quality precision instruments that were still in pristine condition. A note tucked inside the tool roll explained Eduardo's plans for the car. "When I get back from Nam, this Le Mans is going to be the fastest thing on Woodward Avenue. Gonna make Dad proud at the Pontiac Nationals." The discovery that meant the most to Danny was a small notebook Eduardo had kept, documenting every mile driven, every maintenance procedure performed, and his dreams for the car's future. The final entry, dated September 1969, just before Eduardo left for Vietnam, read, 2,847 miles on the odometer. Every one of them a joy. Can't wait to put 100,000 more on her with my future family. This car is going to be my legacy. Danny had to step outside for a moment to compose himself. Here was a brother who'd thought about the future, who'd planned to pass this car down through generations, who'd seen it as more than just transportation, but as a bridge between family members across time. Eduardo's vision was finally coming true, just 53 years later than he'd planned. Word of the project spread through the local classic car community, and soon Tom's shop became a gathering place for volunteers who wanted to help bring Eduardo's Le Mans back to life. Veterans from different eras came to lend their skills. Korean War veterans who'd known Manuel at the Ford plant, Vietnam veterans who understood the weight of Eduardo's sacrifice, and younger veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who recognized the therapeutic power of working with their hands on something meaningful. Each volunteer brought specialized knowledge. Jerry Kowalski, a retired machinist from Chrysler, rebuilt the 326 engine to Eduardo's specifications, incorporating the modifications the young soldier had planned but never completed. Maria Santos, whose husband had served with Eduardo in the 1st Cavalry Division, contributed her skills as an upholsterer to restore the black vinyl interior to factory specifications. The most emotional moment came when they opened the sealed time capsule Eduardo had hidden behind the dashboard. Letters from his girlfriend Linda, photographs of family and friends, and a silver star recommendation that had never been submitted because of administrative chaos following his death. The recommendation, written by Eduardo's commanding officer, described how he'd volunteered for the rescue mission that cost his life, specifically noting his mechanical skills in keeping helicopters operational under impossible conditions. Rodriguez was the kind of soldier every unit prays for, the recommendation read. His technical expertise saved countless lives by keeping our aircraft mission ready, and his courage in volunteering for dangerous rescue missions exemplified the finest traditions of the United States Army. His loss has left a hole in our unit that can never be filled. Danny found himself crying as he read these words, finally understanding the full scope of his brother's character. Eduardo hadn't just been a car enthusiast who died in war. He'd been a hero whose technical skills and courage had saved lives. After 6 months of meticulous work, the 1967 Pontiac Le Mans was finally ready for its first start attempt since 1972. The burgundy paint gleamed with a depth that exceeded its original factory finish. The chrome bumpers reflected like mirrors, and the engine bay was so clean it looked like a jewelry box. Every component had been rebuilt or restored to exceed original specifications, incorporating Eduardo's planned modifications with modern reliability improvements. Danny had invited several special guests for the moment of truth. Carmen Rodriguez, now 86, had made the difficult decision to attend, supported by her nurse and wearing Eduardo's Purple Heart around her neck. She'd kept the secret of her first son for 53 years, but Danny's discovery had finally allowed her to grieve publicly and remember Eduardo with pride instead of hidden sorrow. Tom Morrison documented everything with a video camera, understanding that this moment represented more than just starting an old car. Jerry Kowalski had the honor of performing the final pre-start checks, while Maria Santos sat in the passenger seat where Eduardo's girlfriend Linda had once ridden. A dozen veterans stood around the car, representing different conflicts, but united in their respect for a fellow warrior's memory. Danny slid behind the wheel and looked at the dashboard Eduardo had touched thousands of times. The original AM radio was still there, the instruments were original, and even the steering wheel bore the subtle wear patterns from his brother's hands. The key Tom had made from the original was an exact duplicate, cut from the same key blank Pontiac had used in 1967. "This is for you, Eduardo," Danny whispered as he turned the key to the on position. The electrical system came alive, gauges sweeping to their proper positions for the first time in half a century. Danny turned the key to the start position, and the rebuilt 326 cubic inch V8 cranked over slowly, then faster, then caught with a rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of Tom's shop. The sound was magnificent, deep, powerful, and unmistakably Pontiac. 51 years of silence ended in an explosion of mechanical music that brought tears to every eye present. But the real surprise came when Danny shifted the rebuilt four-speed transmission into first gear and slowly rolled the Le Mans out of the shop. As the car emerged into the Michigan sunlight, something extraordinary happened. The odometer, which had read 2,147 miles when Eduardo parked it for the last time, now showed 2,848 miles. During the restoration, nobody had moved the car under its own power. It had been pushed, lifted, and transported on trailers. The single additional mile remained a mystery that gave everyone chills. Carmen Rodriguez, who had remained composed throughout the engine start, broke down completely when she saw the car moving again. "Mijo," she whispered to Danny. "He's here. Eduardo is here with us." The first test drive was a spiritual experience. Danny piloted the Le Mans through the streets of Detroit, following the same route Eduardo had taken to the local drive-in restaurant where he'd met his friends every Friday night. The car performed flawlessly, its rebuilt engine delivering smooth power, its restored transmission shifting with precision, its suspension absorbing road imperfections with the grace Pontiac had engineered into it 55 years earlier. At every traffic light, people stared. Some were drawn by the car's obvious beauty and restoration quality, but others seemed to sense something deeper, that this wasn't just a classic car, but a rolling memorial to dreams deferred and finally fulfilled. 2 weeks after the Le Mans resurrection, Danny received a phone call that would complete the circle in a way no one could have anticipated. The caller identified himself as Master Sergeant James Patterson, retired, calling from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Research Office in Washington, D.C. "Mr. Rodriguez, I understand you've restored your brother Eduardo's 1967 Pontiac Le Mans," Patterson said. "I'm calling because we've been trying to reach your family for 40 years. There's something about your brother's final mission that the Army never properly communicated." Patterson explained that Eduardo's helicopter hadn't just been shot down during a rescue mission, it had been attempting to rescue the crew of another downed aircraft that included a wounded soldier who would later become a decorated general. That soldier, now retired General Robert Hayes, had spent decades trying to find Eduardo's family to personally thank them for their son's sacrifice. "General Hayes has been searching for the Rodriguez family since 1985, Patterson continued. "Your brother saved his life, and the general wanted to ensure Eduardo received proper recognition for his heroism. We finally located you through veterans' records when word spread about the car restoration." The following week, General Hayes flew to Detroit to meet Danny and Carmen personally. The general, now 74, broke down when he saw the restored Le Mans and learned about the family's 50-year journey through grief. "Your son flew into hell to pull me out," he told Carmen. "I've lived a full life, commanded thousands of soldiers, and received every honor the Army can bestow. But I never forgot the young mechanic who died saving my life." General Hayes had brought something with him. Eduardo's original silver star and purple heart, properly mounted and framed, along with documentation of his posthumous promotion to Staff Sergeant and his induction into the 1st Cavalry Division's Hall of Honor. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Danny first opened his father's garage, the restored 1967 Pontiac Le Mans led a memorial procession to Arlington National Cemetery. Eduardo Rodriguez was finally receiving the honor ceremony he'd been denied 53 years earlier, with full military honors and the recognition his heroism deserved. Danny drove the Le Mans with Carmen in the passenger seat, following the hearse carrying Eduardo's remains, which had been repatriated from Vietnam through General Hayes's efforts. Behind them, a convoy of classic cars driven by veterans from 5 different conflicts provided escort, their engines rumbling in harmonious tribute to a fellow warrior. At the cemetery, Eduardo received a burial befitting a hero. The 1st Cavalry Division Honor Guard performed the ceremony with precision and dignity, presenting Carmen with the flag that had covered her son's casket. When the bugler played taps, the only sound competing with the mournful melody was the gentle idle of the Le Mans 326 V8, as if Eduardo's car was humming along with the final tribute. After the ceremony, General Hayes approached Danny with a final surprise. "The Army would like to purchase your brother's car for display at the 1st Cavalry Division Museum at Fort Hood," he said. "Eduardo's story deserves to be preserved and shared with future generations." Danny looked at the gleaming burgundy Pontiac, then at his mother, then back at the general. "With respect, sir, I think Eduardo would want his car to keep moving, not sit in a museum. But I have a different proposal. Indeed, today, the 1967 Pontiac Le Mans serves as the pace car for an annual charity drive that raises money for Gold Star families and veteran mental health programs. Every year on December 12th, the anniversary of Eduardo's death, the car leads a memorial cruise through Detroit, carrying Eduardo's memory forward and ensuring that his legacy of service continues to inspire new generations. The classic car that hadn't moved since 1972 now moves with purpose, driven by love, and powered by a hero's memory that will never be forgotten.